Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic.
What's an example of an idea that's terrible on paper but worked brilliantly in reality? In the 1700s, this guy named Timothy Dexter had a few of these. Bed warmers are useful in cold climates. But he took a shipload of them to the Caribbean for sale. They were sold to the molasses industry as ladles and turned a handsome profit. He took a load of mittens to the same place. Some Asians bought him to sell onward to Siberia. Newcastle was a major coal mining area. He took a shipload of coal there for sale. Arrived during a major miners' strike. And turned a big profit. He did the mittens thing again. This time to the South Seas. And arrived just in time to sell them to some Portuguese traders on their way to China. He wrote a book, A Pickle for the Knowing Ones, where he refused to use any punctuation. In the second edition he responded to critics by adding 6 lines of just punctuation, to paper and salt as ples. I like this guy. I have a copy. It's incomprehensible. The best part is he was fed the ideas for these schemes from friends, who thought he was a fool. And wanted to bankrupt him. They are all legitimately bad ideas that he pulled off in their faces. What, sir? Would you make a ship sail against the wind and currents by lighting a bonfire under her deck? I pray you excuse me. I have no time to listen to such nonsense. Napoleon Bonaparte. Regarding the steam engine. To be fair, steamships were a fad. Just a long, successful fad. I mean, obviously lighting a constant fire to power a vehicle is ridiculous. Far better to rapidly and repeatedly explode them a little. As someone who spent a lot of time around 2005 trying to describe it to some very skeptical people, I would definitely say Wikipedia. I can't believe this is so low. There's no reason Wikipedia should work. Yet it's really one of mankind's greatest accomplishments. Wikipedia functions on the principle that if a lot of people get to work on an article describing something, the sum total of everybody's contribution will create something that is very close to the objective truth. It's amazing that it worked for Wikipedia, considering this doesn't appear to be the case everywhere else on the internet. Have you ever heard of the pet rock phenomenon? It sounded absurd to sell rocks as pets. On paper it was a headache, but in reality in the 70s people went crazy about it. Sometimes the craziest ideas spark the most. Quote, the guy made $1 million. You know, I had an idea like that once. It was a jump to conclusions mat. You'd have this mat, and on it would be different conclusions that you could jump to. Quote, this is horrible, this idea. My dad has managed to keep his alive over the years through a regimen of neglect and forgetting it. Was in the drawer during every spring cleaning. Cats, the Broadway musical. A nonsense fever dream about horny cat people competing to die and be reborn. Yes, that is the plot, insofar as Cats has one. Based on a book of silly short poems by T.S. Eliot that are not really related to each other except all being about cats. Just cat people introducing themselves and rubbing on each other for several hours. Then one of them ascends, Aka dies. To date, Cats has made over $1 billion worldwide. I love the plot in Kimmy Schmidt about Titus discovering that Cats is just random actors dressing up and getting on stage. I watched a streamed recording of Cats during the pandemic. Was stuck at home and had nothing better to do. I still don't know what I watched. The guys producing the play said pretty much the same thing. https u2.be/dofcwmt7-j0 c equals kfonn77qyva9swuh. Paraphrasing. I'm not sure what we've made here. Is this about British politics and working class dynamics, or some other, deeper thing? Quote, it's about cats. Quote. To date the only production I've walked out of midway through. I had no idea what it was about. Figured, Cats is famous, sure I'll go. Intermission I confirmed there was actually no plot and was just done. The way they extracted those kids from the cave in Thailand. The diver and anesthesiologist. First off, how fucking lucky to find somebody with that overlap in skills. Who was consulted and joined the effort said it was a terrible idea. It was only when presented with the other options that he realized this terrible idea was truly their best option. They rescued all the kids and their coach successfully. Getting incredibly lucky with someone's skills in the right place at the right time makes me think of the Air Transat flight where the flight ran out of fuel and completely lost power over the Atlantic. They were effectively piloting a gigantic glider with 306 people on board. And it just so happened that the captain was an experienced glider pilot. The crew glided the plane to safety in the Azores with nothing worse than a handful of fractures from the evacuation. Or like United Airlines Flight 232, which lost all 3 of its hydraulic systems when an undetected defect in the DC-10's tail engine's fan disc caused it to explode in air. The crew lost all ability to control the plane, except by differentially controlling the thrust of the 2 remaining wing-mounted engines. A training pilot, Denny Fitch, was a passenger on the plane. Having read about Japan Airlines Flight 123, which failed due to a similar total loss of hydraulic control. Denny had wondered if it was possible to fly a plane using just differential thrust. And he had practiced doing so on a flight simulator. After UA-232's systems failed, Denny joined the cockpit and helped control the plane to a landing. Of the 296 passengers and crew on board, 112 still died in the crash. They had to come in fast and hard because they couldn't extend the flaps. However, multiple experts after that attempted to reproduce the flight in simulation, and none were able to yield a landing where anyone survived. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/united_airlines_flight_232. Perhaps not true, but it seems to me that Elon Musk's offer of help being rejected was the turning point in his public image. The rejection? I don't think so. Now, his reaction to the rejection. Yeah, that was the moment many people realized his ego is way bigger than his skills. I think Elon accused the guy randomly of being a pedophile. With Elon, every accusation is an admission. Personally, that was Musk's jumping the shark moment with me. They rescued all the kids and their coach successfully. The fact that none of those kids died is the closest thing I've ever seen to a literal God descended from heaven and made it happen miracle. Cave diving by itself is incredibly dangerous. Highly trained and experienced divers die doing it pretty regularly. And this wasn't just a normal cave dive. This was a cave in the process of flooding, with strong currents and zero visibility for much of the dive. It took the divers 5 hours to tow each of the kids from the chamber they were trapped in through the flooded passages back to the main cavern they were working from. And the craziest part is that all of that had to be done while the kids were anesthetized to full unconsciousness with a drug cocktail of ketamine, atropine, and alprazolam with dosages that were just estimated because they didn't know exactly what any of the kids weighed. And the length of the dive required them to be redosed several times by the divers during the long trip out. The whole thing is totally insane, and the fact that every single kid survived it is miraculous. And the length of the dive required them to be redosed several times by the divers during the long trip out. That was one thing that Richard Harris, the anesthesiologist, mentioned as absolutely insane about the rescue attempt. He thought it would have been unlikely to be successful even if he himself performed the anesthesia on each kid on the way out. But he couldn't be with all of them, so he had to try to field train a bunch of military divers on how to be anesthesiologists while underwater. If it was a movie, the reviews would talk about how absurd it was and that the kids would have died immediately. They rescued all the kids and their coach successfully. It wasn't a total success since one of the Thai Navy SEALs died while diving, but it was honestly a miraculous effort since the early monsoon season meant that the cave would potentially get even more flooded. The other options were drilling a hole straight down to them. Has been successfully used before. For example, with the Chilean miners who got stuck underground, but would have taken a long time due to how deep in the cave the boys were. Or just waiting 4 months till the monsoon season ended and the cave dried up and they were able to walk out. Obviously unacceptable, since this would have almost certainly killed several of the divers, delivering the large amount of supplies they would need. Another Thai Navy SEAL actually died roughly 1 year later from a blood infection attributed to the rescue operation. Putting out oil well fires by blowing them up. Similarly, controlling the spread of forest fires by lighting preemptive fires. Specific forest types rely naturally on forest fires to not only cull overgrowth and maintain ecological homeostasis, but nutrients from the burns feed new growth. Ponderosa, to name but one. The USFS has to constantly get the granola eaters in places like Bend and Flagstaff to shut up and let them do their jobs, because the conservationists don't understand how calamitous letting pine groves go unchecked is in the high desert. So we have this fire that is raging out of control. We've tried everything to put it out. What can we do? So, what if we try explosives? Alternative Soviet take. Have you tried blowing it out like a candle? No. What if you try to blow it out with 2 jet engines mounted on a tank body? Exactly the way we blow out candles in Soviet Union. Attempting to cure syphilis with malaria. Brilliantly worked is a Streck though. The inventor won a Nobel Prize for it too. Gotta love early 19th century medical solutions. Sounds familiar to modern chemo. Let's poison you and hope it kills cancer faster than it kills you. Dropping a whole bunch of cats by parachute over Borneo to stop the spread of plague. I thought you were replying to another comment about not understanding what the musical Cats is about. Lol. Wait, this isn't the plot of Cats. Lol, but no. I was actually referring to Operation Cat Drop, which is crazy, but still makes a lot more sense than that musical. Did they each have their own little parachute, or were they dropped in large cages with large parachutes? The latter makes more sense. But I really like the visual of the former. Yeah, they were dropped in crates. But the visual in my head will always be individual cats with parachutes coming down. Let's drive a car with a GPS and a camera down every street on Earth. The fake inflatable tanks in WWII. Is there much evidence the Germans fell for them in any significant capacity? It wasn't just the inflatable tanks. It was a whole deception operation, Operation Bodyguard. It was a fake fleet of planes, a fake force of men, 1st U.S. Army Group aka Fusage. This phantom force was stationed across from Calais, which was the closest part of France to England, therefore a logical place to attack. FUSAG had fake communication stations set up to give fake radio orders all day long to fake brigades. They moved the vehicles around and left tracks in fields to convince any aerial reconnaissance. FUSAG was commanded by George Patton, who was quasi-suspended after slapping shell-shocked troops in Sicily. But he was the general that the Germans feared the most. Plus, there were intelligence and counterintelligence aspects as well. Notably, the British turned several Axis spies into double agents and had them feeding misinformation to the Axis High Command about Calais being the invasion site. This deception operation as a whole worked exceedingly well. In the lead-up to the invasion, the Germans overly focused on fortifying Calais. And if not for Rommel being assigned the beaches of Normandy would have been relatively easy to take. Plus the placement of stockpiles of ammo and armored reinforcements were impacted by the uncertainty and deception. And after Normandy was invaded, Hitler was convinced it was a feint attack. And the real attack would happen at Calais. So much so that he kept the entire German 15th Army in Calais for an additional 7 weeks, allowing the Allies vital time to build up a beachhead. Maybe they fell for it, maybe they didn't. But everyone had fun playing with them. And in a war, whoever has the most fun is the real winner. Sun Tzu. Possibly not. As it turned out, the Germans didn't really have good aerial reconnaissance of England, and had already believed their intelligence network, not knowing it had been largely invented by double agent Juan Puyol Garcia, aka Garbo. They were fed false information about the D-Day landings in particular, and that a small force would be landing in Normandy, with the main force following a few days later in Calais. This resulted in the Germans delaying on any troop movements to defend the Normandy region until it was too late. So the inflatable tanks, used to make it look like there were huge camps set up ready to invade Calais, turned out to be superfluous. But they didn't know that at the time. If there had been reconnaissance flights over the region that revealed where the troops were really going, it could have gone very badly for the Allies. On smaller scales, decoy camps and airfields were set up in North Africa and in the Pacific. And even if they only fooled a handful of ground attack fighters or bombers, without any major strategic success, it still would have been pretty significant for those camps or troops that didn't get attacked. Because of those decoys,